The space station called Threshold Prime floated in the darkness between stars. It was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Inside its massive halls, representatives from 17 different alien civilizations had gathered for an emergency meeting. The observation chamber was enormous. Thousands of seats rose up from the central floor like steps in an ancient theater. Beings of all shapes and sizes filled those seats. Some had scales. Some had feathers. Some were made of living crystal that caught the light and sparkled. Others were clouds of colored gas contained inside special suits. The galaxy was home to many strange and wonderful forms of life. But today there was no wonder in the air, only fear. Queen of the Empire stood alone at the central podium. She was tall and graceful, with blue skin that seemed to glow softly in the chamber's light. She had 4 arms, which was normal for her species, and large silver eyes that reflected the faces of everyone watching her. They were known throughout the galaxy as a peaceful people. They were poets and healers, philosophers and artists. They had not fought a war in 10,000 years. Now they were dying. "Thank you for hearing me," Queen said. Her voice was soft but clear. The translation systems built into the chamber converted her words into 100 different languages simultaneously. "I come before this assembly not as a ruler asking for political favors. I come as a mother begging for the lives of her children." She touched a control panel, and holographic images appeared in the air above her. The gathered representatives watched in silence as scenes of horror unfolded before them. Cities burned. Ships exploded in the darkness of space. Refugees ran through streets filled with smoke and screaming. Soldiers in black armor marched through the ruins, dragging civilians away in chains. "The Dominion invaded our space 8 cycles ago," Queen continued. "They gave no warning. They made no demands. They simply came and began killing." The images changed. Now they showed something worse than battle. They showed massive factory ships in orbit around conquered worlds. Long lines of prisoners shuffled into those ships. None of them ever came out. "They do not want our territory," the Queen said. "They do not want our resources. They want us, our bodies, our biological material. They process living beings into fuel for their war machines. They have already consumed 3 of our colony worlds. 40 million of my people have been fed into their factories." Her voice cracked. She paused to steady herself. "We cannot stop them alone. Our fleet was built for defense and patrol. We do not have the weapons or the training to fight a war of this scale. We are asking, no, we are begging for this assembly to honor the Mutual Defense Accords. We are asking you to help us." Silence filled the chamber. The representatives looked at each other. They looked at the floor. They looked anywhere except at the Queen standing alone on the stage below. Finally, someone spoke. It was the Grand Crystal of the Crystalline Collective, a being made of living diamond whose body chimed like bells when it moved. "The collective sympathizes with the plight of the Grand Crystal said. "But our resources are stretched thin. We cannot spare the ships or the soldiers needed for such a campaign. We must respectfully decline." Queen closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet with tears she refused to let fall. The next speaker was even worse. The Vapor Confederation expressed deep concern, but claimed that their ancient laws forbade them from interfering in the affairs of other species. The hegemony, whose military was larger than the next 5 empires combined, suggested that they should simply surrender and try to negotiate better terms. "Negotiate?" Queen's voice rose for the first time. "You do not understand. There are no terms. There is no negotiation. There is only the processing line. I have seen the recordings from inside those factory ships. I have heard my people screaming as they are fed alive into machines. I have seen children, separated from their parents and taken away for special processing." She stepped forward, her 4 hands clasped together in a gesture of desperate prayer. "Is there no one in this chamber who will stand with us? Is there no one who will help?" More silence, more avoiding of eyes. In the far corner of the observation gallery, in the section reserved for minor species and unaffiliated observers, sat a small group of humans. There were only 5 of them. Humanity was new to the galactic stage. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. They had no seat on the assembly, no significant military fleet, and only a handful of small colony worlds scattered across one tiny corner of the galaxy. They were nobody, they were nothing, they did not matter. Park sat among the human observers. He was 32 years old, with a round face and tired eyes. He had served in his planet's military as a young man, working as a strategist and planner. Now he worked as a cultural, a fancy title for someone who watched alien politicians talk and wrote reports about it. He had been watching the proceedings with growing frustration. His hands were clenched into fists on his knees. His jaw was tight. Beside him sat the leader of their small delegation. She was older than him, more experienced and far more careful. She noticed his tension. She whispered, "Whatever you are thinking, stop thinking it." "They are going to let an entire species die," he whispered back. "They are going to sit here and watch 40 million people become 100 million, then 1 billion, and they are going to do nothing. There is nothing we can do. Earth cannot afford to get involved. We have no fleet, no allies, no protection. If we anger the great powers, they could crush us without even trying." Knew she was right. He knew it with his head. But his heart was remembering something else. He was remembering his grandmother, who had died when he was 20 years old. She had been a little girl during the Korean War, nearly 100 years ago. She had told him stories about those terrible days, about the refugees fleeing south with nothing but the clothes on their backs, about the fear and the hunger and the death, and about the soldiers who came from across the ocean to help, strangers from countries his grandmother had never heard of, people who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. They came anyway. They fought and bled and died for people they would never meet. Why, Young had asked her once, why did they come? His grandmother had smiled and touched his face with her old, gentle hands. "Because that is what good people do," she had said. "When someone needs help, good people help, even when it is hard, even when it costs them everything. That is what makes them good." Queen asked her question one more time. Her voice was barely a whisper now. "Is there no one?" Park stood up. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the human section. Park felt the weight of those stairs like a physical force pressing down on him. His legs trembled. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears, but he did not sit back down. Grabbed his arm. Her fingers dug into his flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "Sit down," she hissed. "Sit down right now. You are going to destroy us." "Let go of me," said quietly. "This is not your decision to make. You are not authorized to speak for Earth. You are not authorized to speak for anyone. Sit down before you start a war we cannot win." Looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. He understood it. She was thinking about Earth, about their families, about the billions of humans who had no idea what was happening in this chamber. He understood, but he could not obey. "I am not speaking for Earth," he said. "I am speaking for myself." He pulled his arm free and walked toward the central floor. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Representatives whispered to each other in 100 languages. Who was this creature? What species was he? Why was he approaching the stage? The assembly moderator, a four-armed being covered in gray scales, rose from its seat of authority. "The representative from the human delegation is not recognized," it announced. Its voice boomed through the chamber. "Humanity holds observer status only. Observer species do not have speaking rights." Kept walking. "Security will remove you if you do not return to your seat immediately." Reached the edge of the central floor. 2 guards moved to intercept him. They were members of the hegemony, tall and covered in chitinous armor. Each of them was twice his size. Each of them could have broken him in half without effort. He stopped and looked up at them. "I am not a representative," he said, loud enough for the translation systems to pick up his words. "I do not speak for my government. I do not speak for my species. I speak only as an individual, as a human being." He turned to face Queen directly. The Queen stared at him with her large silver eyes. She did not know what a human was. She had never heard of Earth, but she could see something in this small creature's face that she recognized. She saw determination. She saw courage. She saw someone who had made a decision and would not turn back. "You may speak," she said quietly. The moderator started to protest, but Queen raised one of her 4 hands. "This is my petition. I have the right to hear anyone who wishes to address it. Let him speak." The guard stepped back, walked onto the central floor until he stood before the Queen. He had to tilt his head back to look at her face. She was nearly twice his height. Up close, he could see how exhausted she was. He could see the grief carved into every line of her beautiful alien features. "Your Majesty," said, "my name is Park. I am from a planet called Earth. It is a small world very far from here. We have only been traveling among the stars for 40 years. We have no great fleet. We have no powerful weapons. We have nothing that would matter to the empires gathered in this room." He paused and took a deep breath. "But we have something else. We have people. People who remember what it means to suffer. People who remember what it means to be alone and afraid and helpless. People who remember what it means when strangers come to help." He turned to face the assembled representatives. His voice grew stronger. "My species has a long history. Most of it is filled with war and cruelty and shame. We spent thousands of years fighting each other over land and resources and ideas. We killed millions of our own kind for reasons that seem foolish now. We are not a noble people. We are not a wise people. We have made every mistake that can be made." He pointed at the holographic images still floating above the chamber, showing the horrors of the invasion. "But we learned something from all that suffering. We learned that evil wins when good people do nothing. We learned that silence in the face of injustice makes you guilty of that injustice. We learned that the only thing necessary for darkness to triumph is for those with light to look away." His voice dropped, becoming soft and intense. "I cannot promise you ships. I cannot promise you weapons. I cannot promise you victory. My government may disown me for what I am about to say. My own people may call me a fool, but I will say it anyway because it is right." He turned back to Queen and dropped to one knee before her. "Your Majesty, humanity formally requests permission to enter space as volunteers, not as an empire, not as conquerors, as friends. We will come with whatever ships we can gather. We will fight beside your people. We will bleed beside them, and if necessary, we will die beside them." The chamber went completely silent. Queen stared down at the small human kneeling before her. Tears finally spilled from her silver eyes, running down her blue cheeks like rivers of light. "Why?" she whispered. "You gain nothing from this. Your people will suffer for your choice. Why would you do this?" Looked up at her. "Because my grandmother taught me that this is what good people do." From the observation gallery, watched in horror. Everything she had worked for, every careful diplomatic relationship she had built, was crumbling before her eyes. She would have to report this to Earth. She would have to explain how one junior had single-handedly committed humanity to a war they could not win. But even as she prepared her excuses and her damage control, she felt something strange happening inside her chest. She felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt pride. The great powers began to mutter among themselves. The hegemony's representative made a sound of contempt. What could humans possibly offer? They were children playing at being adults. They would be crushed in the first battle. But Queen was not listening to them. She was looking at the human who had done what no great empire would do. She was looking at someone who had chosen courage over safety, honor over politics, hope over despair. She reached down and took his hand in hers. Her skin was cool and smooth against his. "I accept your offer, Park of Earth," she said. "I accept it with all my heart, and I swear to you, on everything my people have ever held sacred, that we'll never forget this moment. We will never forget that when we cried out for help, when all the mighty empires looked away, it was humanity that answered." She helped him to his feet. "Come," she said, "we have a war to plan." As they walked out of the chamber together, the small human and the tall alien queen, something changed in the galaxy. Something small but important. A tiny crack appeared in the wall of cynicism and self-interest that the great powers had built around themselves. In the observer section stood up slowly. She looked at the other human observers. They looked back at her, waiting for her decision. She thought about her career. She thought about the safe choice, the smart choice, the choice that would protect her and her people from the consequences of foolish bravery. Then she thought about what her own grandmother would say if she could see her now. "Pack your things," she said to the others. "We are going to war." 3 months passed. The news of speech spread across the galaxy like fire spreading through dry grass. Recordings of his words were translated into 1,000 languages. Species that had never heard of humanity suddenly knew the name of the small planet called Earth. Most of the great powers laughed. Humans were primitive creatures, barely out of their cradle world. What could they possibly do against the Dominion? They had conquered 50 species. They had ships that could crack planets open like eggs. They had soldiers bred for nothing but war. This would not be a battle, the experts said. It would be a slaughter. But the humans came anyway. 17 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the colony world of Seraph's Garden. It was one of the last outer colonies still holding against the assault. The defenders had been fighting for 6 months. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and running low on supplies. The siege fleet numbered over 700 ships, 40-1 odds. Aboard the human flagship Soul's Pride, Captain Myra studied the enemy formation on her tactical display. She was 45 years old, with gray streaks in her short black hair and a scar running down the left side of her face. She had spent 20 years in Earth's military, fighting in the Belt conflicts and the Mars uprising. She had never lost a ship under her command. Her crew watched her, waiting for orders. They were all volunteers. Every single person on every single human ship had chosen to be here. They had left their homes, their families, their safe lives behind. They had come to fight for strangers. "Captain," her communications officer said. She was a young woman named only 24 years old. "They are hailing us." "Put them through." The main screen filled with the image of a commander. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with dark red skin covered in bony plates. His eyes were small and yellow, set deep in a face that seemed designed for cruelty. "Little creatures," they said. His voice was like rocks grinding together. "We know what you are. We have studied your species. You are soft. You are weak. You have never faced true war." Myra said nothing. She just watched and waited. "Turn your ships around," they continued. "Go back to your little world. This is not your fight. Stay here and we will add your biological material to our collection. Your flesh will fuel our engines. Your bones will strengthen our armor." Still Myra said nothing. The commander leaned closer to the screen. "Do you understand me, little creature? Do you understand what we will do to you?" Myra smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "I understand you perfectly," she said. "Now let me tell you something about my species. We have been fighting wars since before your ancestors crawled out of whatever hole spawned them. We have killed each other with rocks and spears and swords. We have killed each other with guns and bombs and weapons that poison the very air. We invented 100 different ways to destroy ourselves, and then we invented 100 more." She stood up from her command chair. "You think you know war. You are children playing with toys. War is our oldest friend and our greatest shame. We have seen its face more clearly than any species in this galaxy. We know exactly what it costs, and we came anyway. She cut the transmission. All hands, she announced over the ship-wide system. Battle stations, execute Plan 7. They expected the humans to form a battle line. That was how space warfare was conducted throughout the galaxy. Two fleets faced each other, exchanged fire, and whoever had more ships usually won. Simple, straightforward, predictable. Myra had no intention of being predictable. The human ships scattered in what appeared to be complete panic. They flew in different directions, seemingly at random, like frightened animals fleeing from a predator. The commander laughed. They run, pursue them, do not let any escape. The fleet broke formation. Individual captains competed with each other for the glory of destroying the humans first. They spread out across the battlefield, each ship chasing its own target. That was exactly what Myra wanted. During the 3 months of preparation, the human ships had made several quiet trips to the space around Seraph's garden. They had dropped thousands of small packages along the likely approach routes. Each package was a mine, disguised to look like ordinary space debris. As the fleet spread out, those mines activated. 14 warships vanished in nuclear fire, then 6 more, then 8 more. The formation, already broken by their eager pursuit, descended into chaos. But Myra was not finished. On the surface of Seraph's garden, a ground team led by Sergeant had been waiting for 3 days. They had landed using stealth shuttles, hidden themselves among the refugees, and slowly made their way toward the ground-based shield generators. Was 38 years old, a quiet man who rarely smiled. He had grown up in the slums of Old Seoul, fighting for scraps before the military gave him a purpose. He had volunteered for this mission because he believed in what they were doing. He believed that some things were worth dying for. Team 2, report, he whispered into his communicator. In position, came the reply. Team 3. Ready. On my mark 3, 2, 1, mark. 6 explosions lit up the night. The shield generators, which had been protecting their command ship from orbital strikes, went dark. In orbit, Myra saw the shields go down on her display. She allowed herself one small moment of satisfaction. All ships, she ordered, concentrate fire on the command ship, everything we have now. The remaining human vessels stopped running. They turned and fired as one, pouring every weapon they had at the now vulnerable command ship. Missiles and energy beams and slugs crossed the darkness of space in a storm of destruction. The command ship exploded. Without their commander, without their formation, caught in a minefield they had not expected, the fleet fell apart. Some ships fled, others surrendered. A few fought to the death and were destroyed. When the battle ended, 23 ships remained out of 700. The survivors fled into faster-than-light travel, carrying tales of the impossible defeat back to their masters. On the surface, Sergeant stood among the ruins of a processing facility. His left arm was gone, torn off by an explosion during the assault on the shield generators. Blood soaked through the emergency bandage wrapped around the stump. A child approached him. She was small, barely reaching his waist, with the same blue skin and silver eyes as her queen. She had been in line for the processing machines when his team had attacked. "Are you hurt?" she asked in broken standard. Looked down at her. He thought about his lost arm. He thought about the pain that would come later when the shock wore off. He thought about everything he would never do again. Then he smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in years. "Not anymore," he said. The victory at Seraph's garden was real. But victory, the humans knew better than anyone, always came with a price. 7 human ships had been destroyed in the battle. 412 volunteers would never return home to Earth. They would never see their families again, never walk under an open sky, never grow old surrounded by the people they loved. Captain Myra sat alone in her quarters after the battle, reading through the list of the dead. She knew many of these names. She had trained with some of them. She had shared meals with others. Now they were gone, scattered across the void as frozen particles of flesh and bone. Lieutenant had been on one of the destroyed ships. The young communications officer had been transferred to the destroyer Han River just 2 days before the battle. A minor reassignment, nothing important. But the Han River had been caught in the crossfire when the mines detonated. There had been no survivors. Myra remembered the last conversation she had with. The young woman had been nervous about the transfer, worried that she would miss the main battle. "I want to be where the action is, Captain," she had said. "I did not come all this way to sit on the sidelines." Myra had told her not to worry. She had told her that every position was important, that every person mattered. She had promised that they would celebrate together when the battle was won. Now was dead, and Myra would carry that promise like a stone in her heart for the rest of her life. But there was no time for grief. Not yet. They would return with more ships, more soldiers, more anger. The victory at Seraph's Garden had bought time, nothing more. The real war was just beginning. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself could travel. The minor species, those who had been ignored and dismissed by the great powers for centuries, watched the recordings with something they had not felt in a long time. Hope. A species that had only been traveling among the stars for 40 years had done what no ancient empire would do. They had stood up. They had fought. They had won. If the humans could do it, perhaps others could too. Within weeks, volunteers from other minor species began arriving in space. The Trill, small furry beings known for their engineering skills, sent technicians to repair damaged ships. A species of peaceful giants, sent medical supplies and doctors. Even the Proud, who had a history of conflict with sent a squadron of patrol ships to help defend the borders. The coalition grew, slowly at first, then faster. The small and the weak began to realize that together, they were not so weak after all. Queen traveled to the human medical frigate Healing Hands to personally thank the wounded. She walked through the wards, stopping at each bed to speak with the patients. She learned their names, their home cities, their families. She held their hands and wept with them. In one of the private rooms, she found Park. He had not returned to Earth after his speech at the assembly. Instead, he had joined the volunteer fleet as a logistics coordinator. He had no military training, no combat experience, but he had worked tirelessly for 3 months, organizing supply lines and managing communications between the human and forces. When found him, he was sitting beside the bed of Sergeant, who was recovering from the surgery that had saved his life but could not save his arm. Said softly, "You should be resting." He looked up at her with tired eyes. "I cannot rest, Your Majesty. There is too much to do." "The battle is won. You can allow yourself one night of peace." "The battle is won. The war continues." He gestured at the wounded soldiers filling the medical frigate. "These people are here because of me, because I stood up and made a pretty speech. They are paying the price for my words." Sat down beside him. For a long moment she said nothing. She simply looked at the human who had changed everything. "Do you regret it?" she finally asked. "If you could go back to that moment in the assembly, would you stay seated?" Was quiet for a long time. He thought about the 412 dead. He thought about Lieutenant, who had been so eager to join the fight. He thought about all the families on Earth who would receive messages telling them their loved ones were not coming home. "No," he said at last, "I would not change anything. These people, the dead and the wounded and the ones still fighting, they chose to be here. They knew the risks. They came anyway because they believed it was right. If I had stayed seated, their courage would have had nowhere to go. They would have spent their lives knowing that they could have made a difference but were never given the chance." He looked at with an intensity that surprised her. "On my, there is an old saying, A problem shared is a problem halved. We humans spent most of our history fighting each other. We learned, eventually, that survival means standing together. We also learned that the right thing and the easy thing are rarely the same. He paused. Your people were dying, we could help. Everything else was just politics. Was silent for a moment. Then she did something that no monarch had done in 3,000 years. She bowed to a foreign citizen. She bent her tall, graceful form almost in half, lowering her head until it was level with his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving us hope." Outside the medical frigate, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was gathering its forces for a counterattack. The war would continue for months, perhaps years. More people would die. More sacrifices would be made. But something had changed. The galaxy was not the same place it had been 3 months ago. The old order, where the great powers ruled and everyone else simply survived, was beginning to crack. In the observation chamber of the Galactic Assembly, representatives whispered to each other about the Battle of Seraph's Garden. The hegemony, embarrassed by its earlier refusal to help, quietly began sending supplies to the coalition. The Crystalline Collective announced that it was reconsidering its position on military intervention. The tide was turning. And at the center of it all, a species that had only been traveling among the stars for 40 years was showing the galaxy what it meant to be human. Sargent woke up from his drug-induced sleep. He looked at the place where his left arm used to be. Then he looked at who was still sitting beside his bed. "Did we win?" he asked. "We won this battle," said. "The war continues." Nodded slowly. Then with his remaining hand, he reached out and gripped shoulder. "Then we keep fighting," he said, "until it is over, until they are all free." Placed his hand overs. "Until they are all free," he agreed. 3 years passed. The war that everyone said would last only weeks stretched into months and then into years. The Dominion, which had never known defeat, threw everything it had at the growing coalition. Battle after battle raged across the stars. Worlds burned. Millions died. But the coalition did not break. Other species, inspired by the human example, joined the fight one by one. The hegemony, shamed by its earlier cowardice, finally committed its massive fleet to the war. The Crystalline Collective sent its finest warriors. Even the Vapor Confederation, breaking thousands of years of neutrality, contributed ships and resources. The alliance grew from a handful of desperate volunteers into an army that stretched across 100 star systems. And at the heart of that army, leading from the front, were the humans. The volunteer fleet that had started with 17 ships now numbered over 200. People came from Earth, from Mars, from every human colony in the galaxy. They came not for glory or conquest. They came because they had heard the stories. They had seen the recordings. They knew that somewhere out in the darkness, their brothers and sisters were fighting for something worth believing in. Myra was an admiral now. The promotion had come after the Battle of Crimson Reach, where her tactical genius had destroyed an armada twice the size of her own fleet. She wore her new rank reluctantly, preferring to think of herself as the same captain who had led 17 ships against impossible odds. Was a colonel. His prosthetic arm, a gift from the Trill engineers, was stronger than the original had ever been. He had used it to punch a hole through a soldier's armor during the assault on Fortress Moon. The story had become legend among the coalition forces. Park had become something else entirely. He was not a soldier, not a commander, not a politician. He was simply the man who had stood up. The coalition forces called him the Voice because his words had started everything. He served as the liaison between human and command, translating not just languages but cultures, helping two species understand each other. And then, 3 years after that first desperate battle at Seraph's Garden, the final confrontation came. They had gathered everything they had left for one last assault on the... If they could destroy the Queen and the heart of the coalition, they believed the alliance would fall apart. It was a gamble born of desperation. The combined fleet met them in the space above Queen's World. 11 different species stood together, their ships forming a wall of steel and fire between the planet below. Admiral Myra commanded the human forces from her flagship, now renamed Soul's Memory in honor of the fallen. Colonel led the ground defense teams, ready to repel any forces that made it to the surface. Stood on the command bridge beside Queen, watching the tactical displays with calm eyes. The battle lasted 18 hours. It was the largest space engagement in galactic history. Thousands of ships filled the void, their weapons painting the darkness with light. The sound of explosions, transmitted through communication systems, created a constant roar that never seemed to end. They fought with the fury of a dying animal. They threw wave after wave of ships at the coalition lines. They launched suicide attacks against the largest vessels. They transmitted threats and promises of terrible revenge to anyone who would listen. But the coalition held. When the human ship Rising Sun was crippled by enemy fire, 3 cruisers moved to protect it while repairs were made. When the crystalline flagship was surrounded by destroyers, battleships broke through the enemy formation to rescue their former rivals. When the Vapor Confederation's medical ships came under attack, human fighters formed a shield around them with their own bodies. For the first time in galactic history, the species of the known universe fought not as separate empires pursuing their own interests, but as a single united force. They bled together. They died together. They won together. The Supreme Commander's ship was the last to fall. Surrounded by coalition vessels, with his fleet destroyed and his dreams of conquest shattered, he broadcast one final message. "This is not over," he snarled. "We will return, we will rebuild, we will have our revenge." Admiral Myra's response was simple. "No," she said, "you will not." The coalition's combined firepower turned the command ship into dust. In the aftermath, as the survivors counted their dead and began the long work of rebuilding, the Galactic Assembly convened once more. But this time, everything was different. The observation chamber looked the same as it had 3 years ago. The same seats rose up from the central floor. The same translation systems hummed quietly in the background, but the beings who filled those seats had changed. The minor species did not sit in the far corner anymore. They sat among the great powers, equals at last. The Trill, and dozens of others took their places at the central table. And in the seat of honor, in a position that had been created specifically for this moment, sat Park. Queen addressed the assembly. Her voice was strong, but tears flowed freely down her blue cheeks. 3 years ago, I stood in this chamber and begged for help. The great powers turned away. They told me that my people were not worth the risk. They told me that they were too strong, that resistance was hopeless. She paused, looking around at the transformed assembly. They were wrong. She turned to the human delegation. The humans taught us something that we had forgotten. They taught us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is not the possession of great fleets or ancient empires. Courage is the choice to stand when it would be easier to stay seated, to speak when silence is safer, to bleed for those who cannot defend themselves. Her voice rose. You asked nothing of us in return for your sacrifice. 4,000 humans died fighting for freedom. 4,000 strangers who came across the stars because they believed it was right. We can never repay that debt, but we can honor it. She raised her 4 arms in the traditional gesture of eternal friendship. From this day forward, wherever humans travel, they travel as friends of the. Wherever humans are in need, they will answer. This oath is written in the blood of our shared sacrifice. It will never be broken. Rose to respond. He looked older now, with gray in his hair and lines around his eyes that had not been there 3 years ago. He carried the weight of everything he had seen and done. But when he smiled, It was the same smile that had once convinced a desperate queen to hope. "We did not do it for payment," he said. "We did it because it was right. But we accept your friendship, Queen, and we offer our own in return." He looked around the chamber at the representatives of 100 civilizations. Let the galaxy remember this day. Let them remember that when darkness came, it was not the oldest empires or the mightiest fleets that turned the tide. It was ordinary people who chose to be extraordinary. It was beings who had every reason to look away but refused to do so. His voice grew soft but somehow filled the entire chamber. "My grandmother once told me that good people help others even when it is hard, even when it costs everything. She was right. That is what makes us good. That is what makes us human. And now I know that it is also what makes us all kin, every species in this galaxy, every being capable of choosing courage over fear." He raised his hand in a gesture of unity. "We stood alone once. We will never stand alone again. If the darkness ever returns, we will face it together, all of us, as one." The chamber erupted in applause and cheering that echoed off the ancient walls. Species that had been enemies stood side by side, celebrating not just the victory but the new age it had brought. And somewhere in that crowd, watching with tears in her eyes, stood. She had never gone back to being a diplomat. She had stayed with the fleet, fought in a dozen battles, and helped build the coalition that had saved the galaxy. She remembered the moment when had stood up. She remembered grabbing his arm, telling him to sit down, warning him of the consequences. She was glad now that he had not listened. Outside the space station, the stars burned bright and steady. The war was over. The dead were mourned. The living would go on, carrying the memories of sacrifice and courage into whatever future awaited them. And in every corner of the galaxy, on planets and stations and ships beyond counting, beings of 1,000 different species told the story of the human who had stood up when no one else would. They would tell that story for generations to come. They would tell it to their children who would tell it to their children until it became legend, and then myth, and then something even greater. They would tell the story of humanity. And it would never be forgotten.